next week. Yeah. I mean, what's it called? I'm never one for holidays. Anyways, and especially Thanksgiving isn't a particularly important holiday to me. My family, my dad and my kids and my sister will have a small gathering, 6 people or less. Um, but yeah, but it would be in the afternoon. And I told my dad we don't have to have a turkey, and he's like, "But that's traditional." I'm like, "Whose tradition? Why don't we get a fucking parrotfish instead then? Something like that. Why are we gonna? We get a nice big parrotfish. Why are we gonna have a turkey?" And so, but yeah, so my I have lots of critiques about Thanksgiving. I think that we should celebrate Thanksgiving the way that the Adams family celebrated Thanksgiving.
You play.
Kung ganun nga sarap sa. Some of you may remember that the Thanksgiving play. Anyway, okay. Did you start recording? All right. All right,
And then,
here
so
we
yeah, I
go.
mean, as long as you're okay, having class for you, it's Thursday. For the rest of us, it'll be Wednesday night. I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Well, that's fine. I mean, yeah, it'll be a day off for me, so that'll be fun. What better? What better way to spend a day off than to talking about Guam history? All right. And so today we have a very fun one. Last week we talked about Pale Jesus Basadueñas, and in a lot of ways that was a very heavy discussion because Pale that was you know a lot of that was the World War II story, which is heavy to take in, as many of your families probably have difficult, traumatic stories about the war. The sort of the direction that we go in today is very different. Today's Today we are reminded about sort of the importance of humor, levity, and creativity in Chamorro life. And so the person that we are going to be talking about today is, one second, Fat Fat, Clotilde Castro Gold, or as she was known, Tanding, because because Chamorros have such fun with nicknames, right? And so Clotilde, what are you going to call somebody who's named Clotilde, such a fancy name? Of course, you're going to call them Ding, right? What are you going to call somebody whose name is Jose? Well, you could call them Se, or you could call them Ping.
Oh no.
Hava. Oh. And so Clotilde Castro Gould is definitely somebody that I draw inspiration from in a lot of different ways. And so if you wonder why when I teach, I always have a lot of stupid tangents and stupid jokes, a lot of it comes from sort of the philosophy that Clotilde Gould put forth about how we should educate people and how we should promote the Chamorro culture. Should you promote the Chamorro language and the Chamorro culture using somebody else's sensibilities? So should it be serious in a classroom, like wearing a suit and a tie, right? Or should the language come about? Yeah, I know yung mga malago din ako. Or should it come about sort of in the around sort of the table in the back kitchen, ikusin and sanhidrum? Should it come with music? Should it come with jokes? And so Clotilde Gould was somebody who strongly believed that the best way to teach these things was to teach it with a Chamorro spirit, which meant that humor and creativity should be an essential part of it. And so Clotilde Gould was a lot of things. Her life was fascinating, and her list of accomplishments is is uh, is really sort of breathtaking when you think about it. All the things that she did in her life, and all the impact that she had. Although many people are not as familiar, sort of with what she did and sort of all the ways in which she pushed a lot of the movements that we take for granted nowadays. And so she was most known as an educator. She was a storyteller. She was a songwriter. She was also an activist. She was also a civic leader involved in lots of different community groups, women's groups, charities, and so on. She was also a public servant. She worked in the public school system as an administrator for many years. She was also a writer and an author. More than anything, she was passionate about the culture and the language that her people were born with, that it is fun, it is special, and it deserves to be reproduced in different media, that it deserves to be reproduced in the classroom, it deserves to be reproduced on the radio station, in the record player, in books. She was a strong proponent for those sorts of things, that what we Chamorro people were born with, what we were passed on from our parents, from our history, it deserved to live on, that it should not be forgotten. She was tireless in her feeling that we need to preserve the stories, the language, and the beauty of what made the Chamorro people who they are. And so she was honored in many ways for that. She was born before World War II, and she died about 18 years ago. And so I never got to sit down and formally interview her, but I did get to meet her a few times. One of the last times, though, was when they were honoring different masters of Chamorro culture, and she had been honored as. So my grandfather had been with the first group that was honored as masters of Chamorro culture. Tanding was in the sort of the second group, the second wave that got honored, and so I remember me and my grandfather got to sit next to her for one of the commemorations, and she had my grandfather laughing the whole time. She was and I was still learning Chamorro, so I couldn't understand a lot of what they were saying, but I was happy to be there to giggle too. So once in a while I'd be like, oh, I think she said, I think that's a bad word. Oh, I think that's a really bad word. Oh my goodness. Better not ask grandma what she's saying. And so in starting sort of Clotilde's story, she was she was so her mother did not raise her. Sort of her father was there, but her mother was not there for her early years. And so because of this, she represented very well sort of the tradition of Poksai or Peneksai, right? Which is that you are reared by people who are not necessarily your parents. And so she was reared primarily by older women, one of her grandmothers in particular. And so this was a very sort of common thing at that time. It's somewhat common nowadays, but the thing about Penexai is that sometimes those people who aren't your blood parents are more important to you than your real parents. And in fact, the community may actually recognize them more as being your parents, the ones that raised you, than you're the people who actually have the name on your cedula or your birth certificate. And so her grandmother had a huge impact on her and the other women in her life, because her grandmother regaled her with stories. Now Chamorros are gifted storytellers. That doesn't mean that everybody tells stories all the time. And what you'll find is that some families, that the parents didn't tell the children a lot of stories all the time. But other families, their life was filled with stories. And so for Clotilde, her grandmother told her stories about the Talpumotna, told her stories about ancient Chamorros, told her stories about life under the Spanish time, filled her life with stories. And what Clotilde loved to do is retell the stories of her grandmother, but she also liked to add her own twists and change the endings of them. So that when she would be telling her story, a story of her nana to her family, the family would be like, "Oh yeah, we know how this story ends. Oh yeah, we know how the story ends. The Chamorro gets the donkey from the Spanish governor, right?" And then she might completely change the ending, and it would be like, "No, and the donkey died, but there was a lion that had gold in its mouth," and people would be like, "What? That's not what Nana said." And so, but she loved to get that response out of people. She loved that sort of thing. And so that was, that's a very Chamorro impulse, to find ways to be creative, to make people laugh, to remind people about sort of how exciting and interesting life is. And so Judy Flores, in one of her articles on storytelling, in which she acknowledges the importance of Tanding, she does, mention that from the very moment the Spanish arrive in Guam, they recognize that storytelling and poetry are one of the most important things for the Chamorro people. That huge feasts happen, and there's different competitions of strength, competitions of cunning, but the most important thing is when the poets and when the orators of the clans debate, and when they try to connect their stories together and see who can tell the best story, who can outdo the other family with their stories. Now, during the war, um, Clotilde experienced hardship like everybody else, um, like all other families as well. She acknowledges that one of the most difficult times, though, was when they were in Menengen and in the concentration camp, and there was so little to eat, and it was hard for people to survive. This is one of the few sort of widely dispersed images from the occupation. There are quite a few images out there. Most of them are hard to find. They're in collections, but this one you can see a Japanese soldier, a Navy sailor who's doing sentry duty, and then sort of Chamorro women that are walking at a great distance, sort of hoping not to get in trouble from him. But you'll note here, Lanyesti got logan holom tonu, lots of boonie dogs, even back in the day. So Guam has always had an issue with boonie dogs. So one thing that Clotilde and a lot of other Chamorro children loved to do during the war, and this was actually something that she did before the war as well, is that so the schooling during the Japanese period wasn't very good. It was very uneven. It wasn't necessarily for everybody. And it was kind of like the American schooling at the beginning. A lot of it was just focused on teaching Japanese language. And then some of it was just sort of racism. It was just the Japanese feeling that Chamorros are bad and then making them do shitty things to make them learn respect. Right. So like the late Gloria Nelson tells sort of the best stories about her teacher, about how her teacher would have them spend entire school days just collecting flies. They would have to go around sort of the Tidzan area and then the Tsutsugu area, and they would have the Mighty area, and they would just have to fill jars with dead flies, and that was their school. Because the Japanese believed that Guam was a filthy island, as the Americans had believed before them, and that it was covered in bugs, and so their teachers made them do stuff like that. But people like Clotilde would find little ways to get their revenge. And so one thing that helped was that the Japanese couldn't understand Chamorro. Very few Japanese spoke Chamorro. That's why they brought in people from Saipan and Rhoda to be their interpreters. So if you spoke Chamorro, you could say just about anything to the Japanese. And while there was the banning of English songs, so you couldn't sing a song that had an English tune that the Japanese recognized, one thing that Chamorros liked to do was that when they would sing Japanese patriotic songs, they would sneak in Chamorro words that would make fun of the Japanese. Right? So when the students, for example, had to learn a song about how the Japanese flag, they had to learn a song about the Japanese flag and what everything symbolizes, and it was translated into Chamorro. And of course, one of the prominent things on the Japanese flag, right, is that it's apaka. It's white all around, and then it's got the iadao in the middle, the sun in the middle. And so when Chamorro children would sing it, instead of saying the word apaka, they would say the word aplatsa. So instead of saying white, they would say filthy. And so whenever they would sing it, they would sing proudly about, oh, the Japanese flag, it's red and filthy. And oh, the filthiness represents this. And the Japanese would be like, oh, yeah. But the children would be like, oh, you'll use it to wipe your butt. They'd be like switching the words around so they could say terrible things like that. And so this is an example of that. When it was Christmas and it came time to sing Fanmatu Manhengi, which is Chamorro for O Come All Ye Faithful. Sometimes people would change the words so they could make fun of the Japanese. And so children, for example, would sing to the tune of Fanmatu Manhengi, but this was one of the songs that they would make up. Ilek nyasi sehense nagwidza usma milo mandagi si sehense sabat sigu dami danaka shempri umatulahaika imisudzan iketsa pudipanzan mantikidza ganyaku americano kitsa poner.
And so Americano?
Okay,
Japanese.
Buenti ano unsangan na laswabe na. And so what it says is, teacher says that he is our God, but teacher's lying because he's got cross-eyed. Don't you believe it? Because because one day the miso soup and the soy sauce are going to get replaced with the bread and the butter. I prefer the Americans to the Japanese. And so one thing that is less sort of advertised is that Clotilde would also do this before the war and after the war. Is that she would also sometimes sneak in when singing, like in church. She would sneak in profane or silly lyrics to what she was singing. So Clotilde Gould was a very smart student. She graduated from George Washington High School in 1951. She was already sort of teaching elementary before she graduated, and she received a scholarship to go to this college in Illinois. And she attended that. And one of the things sort of that she loved about it is that so when people would say, people would look at her that she was different and she was weird, but she loved to have fun with that. She loved to have fun with people thinking she was different and weird. And so she would what she loved to do is scare sort of the white friends, the white the white girls in her dorm with Tautomona stories. So, for example, if they might tease her, then she might say, "My Tautomona is gonna get you," and they'd be like, "What? What's that? What's that, Hildy?" "My Tautomona is gonna get you." "Oh, what? No, no. What is the Tautomona? What's that?" And so and so, yes. Now she did. Now she returned to Guam soon after, and she met her husband, Ed Gould. And but soon after that, though, for more than a decade, they lived out in the diaspora. And so they raised their daughter Sandy. She was they raised her primarily out there. Um, and I know that from people I've spoken to, she was a big part, especially in sort of the Northern California area. That she was a big part of the Chamorro community out there, sort of helping people stay connected to the island, part of different Chamorro groups, Chamorro festivities. But she was Gof Mahaling. She was very, you know, she missed home a lot. But being out in the States, one of the things that was interesting in California, like close to the Bay Area, was that she became a lot more critical in her thinking about things, and what Chamorros deserved and how Chamorros should be treated. And so when one of her relatives became ill on Guam, she used that as a reason to move back. And so when she was back in Guam, she got a job working for the Department of Education, first creating language arts materials, and then later becoming the head of the bilingual and bicultural program, which is the first formal program in the Guam public school system that used and taught the Chamorro language. So this was originally a program that was started through a federal grant, but then after the federal grant ran out, the government of Guam picked up the tab for paying the teachers and keeping it going. And so this program was very radical for the time. The Chamorro language had been formally banned in Guam schools since the beginning of the American period. For a lot of Chamorros, there was already this mindset that education and the Chamorro language cannot go together. That education is about English, Chamorro is maybe for the church and for the party and for fun, right? But English is what matters. And so there was some resistance, but they pushed through it. They pushed through it and they created this program. And the focus was not on Chamorro only, but the focus was on bilingualism. So that's why here is one of the pamphlets from the program. What is this? The program was designed to teach you to speak, to read, and to write in two languages, so that Chamorros don't forget who they are, right? But that Chamorros can still speak English, function in an American modern society, but that you don't have to forget who you are. You don't have to forget where you come from. You don't have to look down on the things that you come from in order to succeed. This was one of those first moments where Chamorros started to kind of wake up from a lot of the things that they had believed that they needed to do, right? That Chamorros had accepted this idea that you needed to only speak one language, or that you only need to speak the language that'll make you money. And now this is one of those first stages where they're starting to wake up and realize that that wasn't true. And so she was the administrator for this program, from the start of it. And she also, as part of that, produced curriculum. So she wrote several of the primers. She wrote several of the primers that were used. So this would have been from 74 to, I'm not exactly sure. She led it until she retired, but I can't remember off the top of my head the year that she retired. So this is one, but so this is one of the books, but I believe she started in 74 as the chair. Sipates Ngongya. And so children were familiar with these types of primer books, but they'd never seen yet really these types of books written in Chamorro. And so this is about a duck that has really large feet. And so the other ducks make fun of him. Diagof maipi samnak, estabo un patgonngongya na matatatsong gikontonsadok gihilo asu. Gof tristi estina patgonngongya. Sa Hafa, sa ipumalon ngongya na nyanyango giholom honom. Mauusay patas niha para munyango. Lo estina patgonngongya ti hatungo munyango. Donkulu idos patasnya. So maulika, maulik tumogi, maulik mamokat, lo tisinya hausay patasnya para munyango sa maatnya gui. Aduna mafanan gui si patas ngongya. And so a number of the books that the primers that she wrote are available in different archives online, where you can find them, because they're difficult to get a hold of on Guam, sort of the original version. But so, oh wait, and so one of the things that is less emphasized about Clotilde Golde is that she, in the memory of her, is that she was a political activist. And so one of the things that she helped organize was a protest of the Pacific Daily News in 1978. And so Clotilde Golde, along with a number of others who are sort of important names nowadays, such as former Senator Hope Cristobal, who's now the Gehilu, who's now the chairwoman for the commission, the Chamorro Language Commission, Rosa Palomo, who is a retired professor from UOG in the Chamorro language, and Robert Underwood, former congressman. They were all members of this group, along with People's Alliance for Responsible Alternatives, PARA. And so there's different stories as to what happened, but most of them center around Robert Underwood's wife at that time, Lorraine, trying to put an ad in the newspaper for his birthday. And the ad, so the PDN at that time had a English policy, so that nothing could be put in the PDN if it didn't have a translation. So she wanted to put the ad in Chamorro and in Spanish, because Underwood, can speak basic Spanish. And so the PDN said that they were not going to run it as is. She had to buy more space to also get an English translation. Now, this was also true for other languages. It wasn't just for Chamorro. Now, this was an inconsistent policy, because in the past, there had been Chamorro translated, or there had been Chamorro published in the PDN. In the 60s, for example, the PDN on a handful of occasions allowed a letter to the editor published in Chamorro. There was former Senator Martha Cruz Ruth, who had a column for a very short period that was in Chamorro, a very short column in Chamorro in the 70s called Håfa. But at this point, sort of, there was this emphasis on English only, and so they did have these rules. And Para called for a protest. And one of the smart things that they did at that time is that the late Polly Scott, who we met last week, we've talked about before, or Monsignor later, or Monsignor Calvo, he was informed about this and he got really upset. So all of these activists, community activists and educators were upset. But once you had sort of a priest that had strong connections into the community pissed off, Makpo, Oba Scoba, it's over. And so Pale Scott and others, they called out the community and they told people we need to get there. We need to show the PDN that we are no joke. Chamorros are no joke, and our language is no joke. And so Pale Scott, for example, he called up all the senior centers. He called up the mayor's offices, and he told them, he said, the PDN is saying our language is a joke. Our language is nothing. Bring the Manamko. We have to show them that we are to be taken seriously. He called up the SPIMA, the agency which helps the Manamko on the island, and he arranged for buses. That if your old people want to come and they want to protest, then the government of Guam is going to get buses for them to bring them here because they have the right to be heard. And the organizers thought that at the most 70 people were going to show up. Some accounts say that there may have been 800 people who showed up. And they gathered at what is Angel Santos Laddystone Park. At that time, it was just Laddystone Park. They gathered there first, and they all said, we're going to cancel our PDN subscriptions. This is an injustice. And then they marched around Hagatnya and they went to the PDN building and they burned copies of the PDN in front of the building. They had like oil drums and they put the newspapers inside and then they set them on fire. And they had protest signs and you had old people yelling, galabo cow, assholes yelling at them. I love my favorite sign. There's just one sign which is PDN unatenhusu, which means PDN, you're pissing me off. And so, I mean, as you can imagine, the Chamorro people are part of the island, but they're also what's fascinating about Chamorro people is that on the one hand, we are a big, huge, integral, essential part of this island, but we're also very easy to ignore. People take the Chamorro presence for granted very easily, right? And so, so the PDN was owned by, the PDN, I believe at this time was already under Gannett. I believe, I could be wrong, but it was around this time. I could be wrong though, because the PDN had been originally the Guam Daily News. Then there was a Chinese businessman from Hawaii who owned it, and then around this time it sold to Gannett. And so, but if you can imagine, looking out sort of the window, a lot of the reporters at that time, didn't think that any of these Chamorro issues were very serious or important. But once they could see all these people angry and upset at the way they were being disrespected, they realized that, you have to kind of take the indigenous people a lot more seriously. You don't want the natives to get restless like this. So the PDN went to Catherine Ogun, who was the head of Department of Education at that time, and Clotilde Golde with a proposal. They said, okay, there we go. So, okay, yeah, that's what I thought. I was certain it was under Gannett. I was pretty sure it was already under Gannett, 71. Okay. And so the proposal was that in order to try to sort of show that they weren't all bad, that they would translate the comic strip Peanuts with Charlie Brown into Chamorro. And so the man who proposed this, John Simpson, actually 2 years ago, when the last time I was in the States, I visited him in California and I interviewed him about sort of his role in this. And he said basically that, he went to one of those editors. He was an editor at the PDN. He went to one of those media big conferences, and part of that is that they have a section for the cartoonists and the cartoon syndicates, right? The ones that have the ones where you can buy subscriptions for your newspaper from this syndicate, and then you get access to these strips. And so he went there and he met with one of the people that was in charge of peanuts from, I believe it's called Universal Press Syndicate. I think that was the syndicate it was under. And he asked them, "Hey, I'm from a paper in Guam. You know, we publish your cartoon. How can I get permission for us to publish it in Chamorro?" And then the guy was like, "Well, don't know what that is exactly, but why don't you just send us a letter, and then we'll see." And so they did, and they got permission. They got permission that they could do it. So Simpson went to Clotilde and met with her and said, "I have permission. Here's some sample strips of peanuts. We want you to translate it into Chamorro." So like peanuts in English would appear on one side, and then peanuts in Chamorro would like appear on the other side. And so Clotilde Golde tried it. And as you can see, this is a segment from her letter that she wrote to John Simpson in response, where she said, after much deliberation, research, and actual attempts at translation, we have come to the conclusion that it would be too difficult and a disservice to the Chamorro culture for us to translate peanuts. The cultural bias in peanuts simply does not relate to Chamorro culture and attitudes regarding humor. The simplicity, which has obvious double meaning in English, does not translate very well for the characters in the strip. We'd have to change the meaning of the dialogue, and that would violate copyright. Furthermore, none of the characters are Chamorro. That could not ever be considered Chamorro children, even though children are universally accepted. The humor is basically for adults. In order for the humor to be valid in the Chamorro language, Chamorro values must form the foundation of the basic idea. And so what she instead sent forth was a proposal that a new comic strip be created, an original one, which was built in sort of Chamorro culture and the Chamorro humor of the time that she grew up with and that people were living at that time. I mean, when you think about it, translating Charlie Brown to Chamorro would be kind of weird, right? Because sometimes part of it is just the fact that you're familiar with the characters. And so like if the girl pulls the football away from Charlie Brown, like Edwin Brenya, that's what she always does. But if you're new to the comic and she does it in Chamorro, you're like, Agustina Palawan? Kaling matapang Agustina Palawan? Why is this girl crazy? How come she's doing that? Is this a boy? Is this an old man with the weird hair? He's bald. She's being mean to the elder. That's not what we do in our culture. And so even as one person described to me, even something like Snoopy, Snoopy's really cute, but sort of old people would look at Snoopy and be like, Vestina got logo? What is this dog doing? He thinks he's a pilot? Why is that funny? When they go demonas, Vestina got logo, the devil must be in this dog. Santa Maria, we better pray. No laughter here, just prayers. And so Clotilde recommended instead Juan Malamanga. And Juan Malamanga has a lot of different inspiration. If you took my Chamorro history class in the past, we talked about Juan Malamanga. Or we talked about Juan Mala, who Juan Malamanga is partially based on. So Juan Mala was a trickster during the Spanish period who would always kind of stand up for the Chamorro people by making the Spanish look stupid. But he wouldn't fight them, he wouldn't kill them, he would steal from them, but it was always through trickery. It was always through jokes and always through pranks that he would do it. And so Juan Malamanga is similar to sort of what Malfunction created, like Jofus for Ofus. So Jofus for Ofus is just like this Chamorro everyman, right, that he created skits around. Juan Malamanga had a similar character for Chamorros before World War II. Like, so like somebody was like as dumb as Juan Malamanga, or somebody was like as silly as Juan Malamanga. Like if you're trying to say like somebody's dumb, you'd say, oh, just like Juan Malamanga, na you. What's it called? You do this instead of that. You bring this instead of that. And so the characters in Juan Malamunga were the main ones were these three. This is Juan here. Which song? Which song?
The one Malamunga song, but I think it was they probably copied a Spanish song and just changed the words. I'll have to look it up.
The link.
Yeah,
yes,
I'll look it up.
Link if you can find it, because I'd love to know which one exactly you're talking about. And so Juan Malamunga is the main character. He's sort of like a middle-aged CHamoru dude. Juan lives by his own, what is it? To the beat of his own drum, I think they say in English. Juan has his own style, his own flow. He frequently is between jobs. It's clear that he's not a super hard worker, but man, he's dumb some days and he's super intelligent other days. And so Juan is funny. He never misses a good opportunity to make a bad joke. That's Juan Malamunga. Nano is sort of an interesting sort of character. Nano, sort of the young man here in the front. Nano is sort of a younger guy who went to school in the States and has come back to Guam. So he is, in comedic terms, he's the straight man. So like Juan sets up a joke against Nano, oftentimes. And then Kika here is funny. Biha is Kika. She's an older woman. You know, she wears sort of the garb of an older, very religious woman. Logo Dudo Sikika Lokwi. Kika's always looking for love. There was no Tinder or anything like that or eHarmony back then. But if there had been, Kika would have been on it. Because she's always looking for men to date. She's always it would also include things such as, you know, everyday professionals, doctors, police officers. The duendes also would sometimes make appearances, as well as the tautomon. And so here are some samples of the Juan Malamunga comic strip. It was begun in 1981, and it still continues up until this day. And in fact, when I was at the University of Guam, one of the things that I worked on, that it had been started by a previous professor, Peter Onodera, was to revive the Juan Malamunga comic strip. So Peter Onodera worked with his students to create new strips, new jokes. And then Rick Castro, an art professor, he would then have his art students draw new strips, and then the PDN would publish them. And so when I was in CHamoru Studies at UOG for several years, every semester I would incorporate into my CM 102, my CHamoru Level 2 classes, a project where they had to come up with a strip on their own. And then the best I would send to Rick to be made into new comic strips. And so you can see one of the great things about Juan Malamunga is that it's something where, you know, these are bad jokes that will oftentimes get your nana giggling, may get your nana slapping her knee. Because but a lot of them are bad. Like a lot of them are like, okay, so here. Juan, huli'i otro tautao at sitsikui nobiamu. Juan, I saw another person kissing your girlfriend. Ginagaw salapi and manadzin siniku. Did she ask for money when she was done kissing? Ahi, questi nobiahu. And it's not my girlfriend. Right here. Juan, hafa Juan na tristihan. Why are you sad, Juan? Malago zu guy relos. I want to have a watch. Polo Juan zebefahane how relos mo. It's okay, Juan. I'm going to buy you a watch. Siguiente dia, next day. Juan, uhu relos mo. Juan, here's your watch. Sizus masi nano. Hafa Juan na tritristi haha. Why este reloj mo? Juan, why are you still sad? You already have a watch. Huunai no tiu tungu tumaita I ora. I know, but I don't know how to tell time. I love this one here though. Statehood malagohu. Commonwealth Zoo. Statehood is what I want. I'm for Commonwealth. Afana gumemento hamzu. How come you're arguing? Afana zoo. Ada kumekwento zoo por estado political. Basta ekungo kai pamalo. Like, just look, just, like, listen to the people, listen to what the others say. Pues basta. So that's enough. So magahid hawan, because you're right, one. And then after si one, his shirt says vote for independence. Juan is an independent supporter. Or some of them were silly English jokes, based on the way that CHamoru's would say English words. Para manuha Juan, where you going, Juan? Para baifalaki medikuhu, I'm gonna go to my doctor. Afatsanot mo, what's your illness? Hekwazu na para baifalaki mediku. I don't know. That's why I'm going to the doctor. All right, you've seen any medico at the doctor's office. What's wrong? I ate bat, doctor. I ate bat, doctor. I had bat, doctor. From now on, you eat good. I ate bat, doctor. Now you eat good. Oh. See, I remember when I was first learning CHamoru, I would have my grandmother translate one Malamanga with me, like just about every day. And sometimes, like, the comics would make her laugh so hard, and I would not understand what was so funny about it. The one the one that made her laugh way too hard, and I still don't exactly understand why, is the one where there's a young boy, and the young boy asks Juan, how many fingers does a person have on their hand? And Juan says 10, just. And then the boy says, let's see how, 11. You're wrong, 11. And then he puts his hands up and he's got 6 fingers on one hand. And then my grandmother wouldn't stop laughing about that. And I was like, why is this funny? And she was like giggling and she was laughing. And she's like, well, no, sometimes people have 6 fingers. I'm like, what? That's a joke? She's like, okay, I understand. Before the war, sometimes people had 6 fingers. I'm like, that's the joke, is that sometimes people had 6 fingers. But anyways, perhaps there was something before the war. I don't know. I just like remembering my grandmother laughing hysterically. So, Clotilde was also a songwriter. And so the songs that she wrote, though, she wrote them anonymously. So when you look, for example, in the liner notes for the albums when they initially appear, she's not credited as the author for them. So in Johnny Sablon, for example, she wrote several songs for Johnny Sablon. And in the notes, it says Painaan, no, without a name. And so, but 3 of the songs that she wrote for him, Adios Querida, Imambiha Nachempu, Karileku Hafade, which I know in the Punadera class, for my Saturday classes, we translated that a couple weeks ago. But so, hold on a second. I wanted to... Imambiha Nachempu is a very fun song. It's a very silly song. So let's see if I can... Here, I can't. Can you hear that?
Manbia na tiempo mamboka mamahon Anadanya yafo kamaska zanhagon Andi maulan mangangas pues empil mapahon Ipigwa umanglo lomani mamahon Isinya uzangani Para imamahon Matuli matitu zahagu mapahon Isinya usangani niunu nalatsi like you. Hana mamokat gikanto ni sala. Isad no rumano kisad no palana. Igaput hulu maketso sa mausay mestiza. Van hana iman mia po van hos mimisa.
All right. And so it's a very funny song, sort of celebrating older Chamorro women, right? Sort of Imambiha na Chempo means the time of the old lady. And so it mentions, for example, that Imamboka Mamaman. So and it talks about how for a lot of them, chewing pugwa was one of the most important things. And I love the line here. Ang unsangani popare mamaon hatsuli matido zahago mafaon, which means, and if you tell them to stop chewing pugwa, they'll take the hammer and you are the one that's going to get pounded. So another good one from her, Ina Pinikada, which in some ways may have been, sort of connected to her own sort of lifestyle, because Ina Pinikada talks about how, young girls who are mischievous and say they're going to church, but they're really going to go and do other things. And so, but anyways, so eventually Clotilde was recognized as a master storyteller by the Guam Council on the Arts and Humanities. And so, this was an important distinction because even after, she did a lot of things, but one of the main things that she just loved to do was to be in front of children, to be in front of crowds and to tell stories. And it was common for her, for example, to take her guitar with her and then sort of just incorporate music into the lesson and whatever she was talking about too. Sort of coming up with simple songs to teach basic lessons in Chamorro. And so she's really known for very well for that aspect. And so she has a poster, which you can see in different places around the island as part of her recognition as a master storyteller. But people forget that she was also recognized as a master for Kantan Samudita. So that there have been a few groups that have been honored. So in terms of the list of masters, there's several dozen masters of Chamorro culture. Some of them are quite well known, some of them are lesser known. And part of it has to do with whoever was in charge of the government of Guam at that time and their approach to who they wanted to recognize. And so you have some masters, like for example, for master blacksmith, there's my grandfather, who is one of them, but then also Frank Lazama, his former student, has achieved master status as well. You have a number of master weavers, going from Tanilena Benavente, who along with Lucia Torres was the first weavers to be recognized as masters. But then you have a number, Florin Paulino Meno, who is also included as one of the Chamarita singers. And then also Phil Sablan later, lots of different masters of weaving, masters of net making. But you also had some people who were recognized as masters for things which were very common, and so there was some criticism, right? So, for example, you had several people who were recognized as master farmers, and everybody farmed back in the day, so it was hard to tell how could you really pick somebody to be recognized as the best farmer or as a master farmer, and so only a few groups have ever been recognized. One of them, the other group is Recuerdos de Ayer, which was a post-World War II Chamorro band. which played and got together in the ashes of World War II. And they were recognized, but almost everybody has forgotten sort of about them. But this was a group of chamarita singers. So Kantan chamarita is really something, it was an essential part of Chamorro life. It expressed so much. It expressed so much of Chamorro life. And in fact, I wanted to give a Esta. Okay, hold on. I wanted to give you actually something in the voice of Clotilde herself. Because she did she got a number of grants, and one of the grants was for her to document the Kantan chamarita. And so first, before I talk about it, let's hear from her.
Chamorro culture, and usually it occurs during a chamarita is a traditional song in the Chamorro culture, and usually it occurs during a thatching roof preparation. As you can see in this environment, the frame of that building is being prepared while the ladies and sometimes men also weave either the napa or the palm fronds in preparation for the thatching party. In the meantime, while this is going on, it's considered a real social thing more than work. So what they do is they sing, and I guess through boredom in the past, what they've done is they sing, or different individuals who are talented in the what they call chamorita communicate. Chamorita is a song, and it's traditional. It's usually a song of mockery or a song of challenge, where two individuals communicate to each other. Either they insult each other, or they compete who has the best fishing skills, or whatever that they want to engage to. It could be a competition with a boyfriend and insulting each other back and forth. It's spontaneous. It's usually 4 lines, the second and the fourth having to rhyme. And it's really very difficult for just anyone to do such a thing, being that you have to rhyme it, plus the fact that you have to come back with the answer to the challenge that is being thrown at you.
And so the Kantan chamarita, as I said, represents so much of the Chamorro culture and sort of its possibilities. The Kantan chamarita, so it may have been something which Chamorros in ancient times were trained for, but eventually it became this thing that almost everybody could participate in. This just spontaneous singing and poetry. And some people might be really good at it, other people might not be that great at it, right? But it was part of the fact that Chamorros felt that song and singing was a key part of who they were, and a key part of how they filled their days. And so Judy Flores, who has written a lot about the Kantan chamarita, says that even when she was growing up in the village of Inarajan, you could still hear the chamarita songs being sung. And that it might be where a farmer begins his day on one end of the village, and as he is walking through the village, he is singing a song, and as he moves from house to house, different people, as they wake up or as they're making breakfast, as they're getting ready for the day, will throw verses at him, and he'll catch them, and he'll throw verses back as he's walking. And so this one man, over the course of an hour, will have sung songs with 20 different people as he walks through the village. And that those people may then turn their voices to sing to others, their neighbors, and so on. And these don't have to be super deep and complicated songs. Some of them can just be very simple. But ultimately, the creativity, the spontaneity, and sort of was something that people really cherished. And so I'm very glad that sort of Clotilde Golde and others worked to sort of preserve knowledge about this. one of the unfortunate things, though, is that even if you can preserve knowledge of it, preserving the skill of the Kantan Samarita is not something that you can do by writing down the words. It comes about from having knowledge of the language. So even as the lines from verses have been written down and preserved, if people don't have the fluency in the language, then they can't necessarily carry on the skill itself. Because even for me, sometimes I try what Clotilde Golde does. So like when I'm listening to songs that are in English, sometimes I'll just make up my own words in CHamoru to go along with them. And it always irritates people that are with me, because they're like, it's not what they said. I'm like, okay, I'm just making up my own words. So when I was learning CHamoru, I challenged myself once where I listened to an entire Beatles CD, and I had to try to make up the words in CHamoru to each of the songs as I was listening to them. And sometimes for some songs it was it was harder than others, but it was the Abbey Road album. So it was kind of interesting. Some of those songs translate real easily. So Clotilde Golde, this is from actually when Robert Underwood was congressman, and he read a commendation of her efforts. She was given a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Guam Council on the Arts and Humanities in the year 2000. And so Robert Underwood read a speech into the record about her and what she's contributed. Through her song lyrics, the comical situations she has concocted, and the lessons brought forth by her storytelling, Mrs. Golde has touched a generation of children, young adults, and students. Her exceptional ability to communicate with people from a wide range of age and educational backgrounds has enabled her to pass on the values and standards of our elders to the younger generation. Her life has been dedicated towards the preservation of our island's culture and tradition. For this, she rightfully deserves commendation. So even into her old age, she still participated in protests. So if you look here, Clotilde Golde is right here in a wheelchair, standing next to Madeline Berdalio and First Lady Jerry Gutierrez on the other side. And so if you haven't heard about it, Marie Claire, this was the Marie Claire protest about 20 years ago. And it came about because, well, first of all, let's see who's here. There's Debbie Kanata. She was the Magahaga of Nashon Chamorro. That looks like Anita Sokola, who's now a judge on Guam, behind Jerry. That's Fayette Garrido. He's the former Magalahi of Nashon Chamorro. Looks like Malia. No, that's Howard Hemsing. Excuse me. This is Ron Laguatnia. This is Trini Torres. And so the magazine Marie Claire published not even like a full article, but just sort of a silly piece titled "Jobs Your Boyfriend Would Love." And in it, they had a passage in which they talked about Guam. And it said that in Guam, it's not good to be a virgin. And so there's men who like have full-time jobs to go around deflowering virgins. And so it was really offensive. It was based on, an ancient Chamorro description, right? That in ancient times, it wasn't necessarily considered great to be a virgin. And there was no stigma to an unmarried girl having children. And so, and in the Guma Uritao, it was often, so when families would arrange for a match, not like a marriage match, but sort of a date match between a boy and a girl in the Guma Uritao, it was common for the girl's family to give turtle shell or to give some form of compensation to the boy's family. Although if the girl got pregnant, then the boy's family then had to pay extra back. And so Marie Claire took that very much out of context, wrote it in a much more salacious way, and then put it in this piece about jobs your boyfriend would love. And it reached Guam and it pissed off a lot of people. So at this protest, they did burn some copies of the magazine and so on. But this is, interestingly enough, the location where the PDN protest, sort of more than 20 years earlier, started as well, in Laddystone Park. And so the legacy of Clotilde Golde. So she has had an impact on a lot of different things, a lot of things that we, that CHamoru's needed in terms of pushing for the inclusion of language and culture into formal education in Guam. It's a hugely important thing, sort of even pushing for more rights and to be treated with respect by the Chamorro people. She was involved in a lot of these sorts of things. But even for me, what's very important is her, and we can learn from it too, is her emphasis on how we can empower and inspire people too. And so I love her quote here: when learning is combined with the pleasure of humor, lessons have a better chance of being retained by students and the general public, right? And not that humor is this extra thing, right? Because when you think about it, all cultures love humor, but then there is this feeling that we've inherited, that sort of humor belongs as this extra fun side thing, that humor is not really an important thing. And so one thing that we've seen happen from this, as sort of we've gone through colonization, is that Chamorros still are a very creative people, but we've come to devalue and de-emphasize our own creativity. But one thing that Clotilde Golde believed was that we should preserve our creativity. It's who we are. It's where we come from. It's how we reach our people. It's not to deny it. It's not to erase it, but we should preserve it, and we should find ways to keep it going. And that's one reason why she did so many things. Why she fought as a community activist, why she wrote songs, why she wrote books, why she was an educator and she gave presentations to children. She was even in FESPAC. I remember she went with my grandfather to Australia in the 80s as part of FESPAC, representing Guam as a storyteller. And so her legacy offers a lot of lessons that we can still learn in terms of moving ahead and what we need to do to keep alive that movement. The musicians, the Castro brothers, or Rick, you mean Rick and Ron Castro, those Castro brothers? I believe so. I believe so. I don't know how closely related. And so, yeah, todus masing. That is it for Clotilde Golde.
I was actually thinking of the
questions?
Castro. I was thinking of the Castro brothers that we had the 10 figures on earlier. The ones here in California.
Oh, okay.
But I know the other Castros you mean.
Those Castro brothers. Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. She might be. Actually, she might be because I know, yeah, she's got a lot of relatives in the Bay Area. So they might be. I should ask, actually. All right. Does anyone have any questions or any comments? So if you ever think that if you're taking a free class with me and I'm just messing around and joking too much, fuck you. Clotilde Golde says I could do that. Oh, excuse me. As Tan Clotilde Golde said, fuck you. And so, no, but it is what I feel inspired by in her, though, is that she leads us towards a new paradigm in terms of thinking about basic things. Because our way of doing it now is that sort of you have this Western way and then you just add in a little bit of Chamorro flavor to it, right? And that's what you're supposed to do. But what she's reminding us is that, yeah, that may not actually work, because especially in terms of education, because if you're still from an island people and an island culture, if you're going to try to reach people in this way, all you're going to do is hurt them. All you're going to do is take them away from what they were born into. All you're going to do is deprive them of the joy, the creativity that they should learn coming from a particular family, from a village, from an island, from a people. But that's where we're kind of at now, is that all of these questions get opened up by people such as Clotilde Golde, and even people such as Robert Underwood, Hope Cristobal in the 70s and in the 80s, where they kind of try to open up how we see things. But it was only a few years ago that they finally created an immersion program for the Chamorro language. And so there's lessons out there, but we gotta learn. I mean, we gotta learn them. When you think about, why is it that Clotilde Golde wrote songs for Johnny Sablon? Part of it is just because, her desire to support Chamorro music and those who were helping Chamorro music adapt to sort of to the new times and to the new tastes. And so we need to sort of keep those lessons in mind, is that she was somebody who really saw the potential for things being lost and was trying to find ways to keep them going, trying to find ways to keep people wanting to know those things.
But she never wanted recognition for it, for the songs.
She didn't want a lot, no. Yeah, and she didn't really want a lot of recognition for a lot of things. She was very humble in that way. But everyone knew that she wrote them. Everyone. Oh, if there's no questions, we've got three more. We've got Gualu, we've got Sigua, and we've got Manu. We have three more figures. Woohoo! All right. I had a lot of fun with this one. It was nice to think about Clotilde Castro Golde again. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's nice to talk about Juan Malamunga too. If for those of you who are looking for ways to increase your practice of the Chamorro language, translating Juan Malamunga comic strips is a pretty good way, especially if you have Chamorro speakers who can help guide you in the translation. All right. Okay. Sidus Masi. Hamzo. Everyone keep staying safe.
You too.
Mike San Nicolas won the runoff. And so he won the runoff, and so we get 2 more years of Mike San Nicolas. Not my Godzu, but I don't know, the people have spoken. All right, adios.
Adios.